So the topic that we are going to discuss now is how to create nested component and how to communicate between the component. So this is a very important program in the Angular development perspective. So please pay your attention. Okay, and if you have any questions, please let me know. So when you're talking about the Angular component, you all know we'll be having one module. This is going to be your let it be app module, and we'll be having one root component. So far we have done up to this. So this is your app module and we have one root component. So to distinguish that, I'm just creating like this. This is your root component. So what about this root component? You can have properties and methods, good. But I want to have some component which needs to be placed inside this, like this. A component inside another component. And I want this component, this inner component needs to take the data from its parents. And similarly, this component should give the data to the parent. Take the data and give the data. So this is going to be your app component, which is considered as a root component. That's why it is called as root. And this is going to be your inner component. Okay, so this is your app component and this is your inner component. If I'm having a property here, let it be a property called title, which is assigned with some value. How to pass that to the child component, and similarly how to get back the details from the child. For example, here I'm having state. I want to take it and use it in my app component. So this is what this program is all about. That is creating nested component and communication. How to pass the data between the components. Okay, let me get into the demo. So in the index.html, there is no change. We are just going to maintain the same program. And in the main.ts, also there is no change because it's just having the bootstrap detail. And in the app.module.ts, I have removed the unnecessary things which we have created in the previous program. And this app.module.ts, as of now, it is depending on only one module called browser module, and we have only one component called app component, and it is going to be my root component. And in the app.component.ts, in the previous program we have created some properties. I'm just deleting all those stuff. In fact, I'll clear everything. The remaining things is going to be same. And finally, in my app.component.html, I'm just changing this to title and body. Okay, nothing special here. So this program is all about nested components and component communication. So when I run this, you should see something like this: nested component and component communication, and we have the title. So we have our app component. This is going to be a root component. Okay, I'm just giving a h1 tag or h2 tag and saying that this is a root component, this is app component, hr/. Now I want to create one more component. So to create the component, we should have it in the app folder. As a best practice, whenever you're creating a component in the real-time project, because in project they will be having, each and every project will be having their own folder structure. So I will recommend to have inside the app, create a folder called components. Inside the components, place all the components. That's a recommended way, but it depends on project to project. If your project people is giving you a project folder structure, please follow that accordingly. So to just start up with that stuff, I'm just creating a new folder called inner app. So I'm having inner app. So this folder is going to have the inner app component. So as usual, it will be having a new file called inner app dot component dot ts. So this file naming convention is very important. Look at the way why I have created like this. So if I want to do this, I need to have a class. I should be caps, and once again A should be caps and C should be caps. Okay, so that's why I have saved the file like inner.app.component.ts. So we need to export it. This is done. This is your component class. And if I want to have a linked template, okay, if I want to have a linked template, we need to create that file name, which is very much similar like the component name. I'm copying it. Just we need to say new file, paste it. Instead of .ts, it's going to be .html. So that's where the HTML stuff will go into the picture. So the naming convention is very important. Okay, for app component.ts, app.component.html. For inner.app.component.ts, inner.app.component.html. So in this, I'm just going to take this content. Assume that I'm just taking this part, pasting it here. This is my HTML part, and I'm just saying this is the child component. And let me give the name as inner app component. Okay, so we have the template ready, and now let me build the inner app component properly. So this is a class. I want to make this as a component. If I want to make this as a component, use the import statement at Angular/core. From there, pick up the component decorator and decorate our class with this component decorator, and you need to specify the selector. The selector is, I want to select it with app-inner, and the template, I'm just going to use template URL. Okay, from the current folder, pick up the inner.app.component.html. Save it. So now we have our component ready. I want to render this component in my root component. So I'm just picking up the selector, going back to my app.component.html. Okay, after the horizontal ruler, or even I can have it in another div tag. Okay, let it be in the parent itself. In this div tag, I'm just going to call app-inner. So look at this. I'm just trying to render my component, the component, child component inside this root component. When I'm trying to run this, there is some error. By this time you would have guessed what is the error. The error is when I try to go to the console part, it says that it cannot understand app.inner is not a known element, because my module doesn't know anything about the app-inner. And I hope you all know, whenever you create any component, your module should have an idea about that. So go to your app module and you need to import it here. Import from ./inner app/inner component. From there, pick up the inner component, declare it. So now my module knows about inner app component, and we are trying to render that here. So as a result, you should see something like this. So we have our root component. Inside the root component, we have our child component. Okay, this is your root component. Inside that, we have the child component as well. Now the task is, I just want to, if I place some properties in my root component, how to take it to the child component, and similarly, if I have some properties in the child component, how to take it back to the root component. That's what this component communication is all about. Okay. Okay. Now, why we need to create a child component? Why we need to have another component means mainly for reusability. For example, we have this app dash inner, right? So I can copy this and we can have it n number of times. We can put it into a loop and we can have this 100 times as well. For example, in the product component, if I create one product component, so I need to pass the data. If I pass the data to the product component somehow, then it can take the data and it can render for 1000 products as well. So it just the main reason for using the component is for reusability. So when I run this, you have this 4 child component inside the root component. You decide it. So when it comes to HTML part, you all know we'll be having one site wrapper. This site is going to have a header wrapper. This is how we used to design priorly, right? And we'll be having a body wrapper and we'll be having a footer wrapper. If you feel that this part needs to be available as separate component, yes, you can do it. You can just ensure that this is going to be a root component, header component, body component, footer component. But when you need to think about a component which needs to exist on its own, in the sense, especially when you want to have that component reusability, mainly for reusability, think about it. Yes, it is required. For example, header component makes sense to create it as a component because we'll be using it in many places. And in fact, Angular application is used to create single page application. We'll be moving into a concept called routing and all those stuff. So this will be fixed. This will be fixed. Only this portion is going to be keep on changing. So this portion will be keep on changing. These are all components. So I can just take the data and put it into this particular placeholder. So in the CSS, if you think it as a section, that can be considered as a component. You can create small component, assemble it together to create an Angular application. Okay, now we are back to our console. So far what we have done is we have our module. In that module we have one root component. That root component is having another child component. Okay, so to distinguish that, I'm just giving a color. So this is your inner component and this is your outer component. Okay, and this is your module. Now the task is, I'm just going to put some property in the outer component. Let it be component, a property called outer message. Okay, with some value. And I want to access that. Here it is easy. In the template we can use either property binding or interpolation, we can use it. But how we are going to pass it to the child? That is the interesting part. That's what we are going to discuss now. For example, I'm just going back to my, so I'm just deleting this part. So save this. In my app component.ts, I'm going to have one property. Okay, so the property here is outer message or app component message, which is going to be a string. And let me initialize this in the constructor. This dot app component message equal to message from app, that is root component. So this property you can access it anywhere in the template. That is in the app.component.html, you can access this using the property binding or else with the interpolation. That's not a big deal. But how you are going to pass it to the child? For example, in the app.component.html, you can use this in a span tag. This one can be used anywhere in the template, anywhere it can be used. So we can get that. So you can see it here. But what I want is, I want to take this message and put it inside the child component. I want to pass it to the child. And as a best practice, the root component should send the data to the child. Okay, it should be unidirectional. Always the properties, the child component should receive the details from its parent. Okay, so that's a best practice. Remember that in your mind. We'll have a discussion on that later. Now, how to pass it? So to pass it, first I'm just going to create I'm just going back to my inner component. In the inner component, I'm just simply creating one property name, okay, which is going to receive something from the parent. In the inner component.ts, I'm creating a property called app component message holder, which is of string type. Okay, and it can be in any name, but to make you understand it, I'm creating like this: app component message holder. Now this inner app component is having a property called app component message holder, right? This is the property of this particular component. In that case, can I use this something like this? Right, I can use it, right? Because this is a property of app-inner. It's a known property, but unfortunately we cannot use it by default like this. So I'm just going to use the property binding syntax. So from the app component, can I pass this app component message to the child component like this? Means yes, we can do it, because this app component message holder is a property of app-inner. That is, inner app component is having this property. To that property, I'm using the property binding syntax, because in the root component, wherever you want, you can access this app component message. I'm just doing a property binding and I'm passing it. But if I want to receive it, this should not be just a property, it should be an input property. In the inner app component, right now it is just a property. By default, it cannot receive the data from its parent. If I want to receive it, it should be input property. So in order to make this as an input property, it needs to be decorated with @input, which is available in the Angular core. Now I'm decorating it with input. When I specify input, now it is eligible for receiving the property from its parent. By default, it is just a property. If I want to make it as an input property, it needs to be decorated with @input. Okay, now it can receive the property from the parent. So once we receive it, you decide it how you want to display it anywhere in your inner app component.html. So in the inner app component.html, I'm just going to display it here. Message from root. Save it. So what we have done is, now we got the data from the root component, we pass it to the child component, and we are receiving it. After receiving it, I'm just printing it. Okay, so yes, so you all understood the concept of this input decorator. So what is the usage of this input decorator? It is used to, okay, decorate the property. Once you decorate that property with input decorator, now this property is eligible of getting or receiving the properties from its parent through property binding. So if you look at this, we are receiving the property from its parent through the property binding. That is the usage of the input decorator. Okay, this is done. What about in a reverse order? Like I'm having something in the child component. Okay, like app component message, I'm just going to have in the child component, I'm having one more property, inner app component message. That's a string. Inner app component message from inner app, which is a child component. Now this can be accessed anywhere in the inner app component.html, but I want to pass it to its parent. So if I want to pass it to its parent, okay, obviously we need to do it with the help of event binding. From the parent to the child. Remember, from the parent to the child, use property binding, whereas from the child back to the parent, okay, here we need to use property binding that we have done with the help of input decorator. Whereas if I want to do this way, we need to use event binding using at output decorator. Okay, now look at this. So if I want to achieve this, first I need to create an event here. This component doesn't have any event as of now, so we need to create an event here. So to create the event for this component, we have a class called event emitter class. This is, the people from the Node.js can understand it better. Event emitter is a node related, in the node they have, if I want to create an event, we need to use this event emitter class. So Angular bargained that, Angular is trying to take that particular feature and implement it here. So I want to create an event. So to create the event, I'm just saying inner app event, which is going to be of event emitter type. That too, whenever it's emitting, whenever this event is triggered, I want to pass some string data. I created a variable like this. So inner app event is of what type? It is of event emitter type, and it's going to emit a string. So let me initialize this by saying this dot inner app event equal to new event emitter, which is going to return a string or emit a string. So we have initialized that. Now we have the event ready called, so we have created the custom event which triggers string data. Okay, now it's done. From the inner app component, there should be some user interaction should happen, then only we can pass the data, right? So to do that, I'm just going to have a button. Okay, I'm just saying send data to parent. Send the data to parent. Button with a class btn dash primary. When you click this button, I want to call a function named send data or send data. So you all know where we are supposed to write this function. We are supposed to write it in the inner app component. So in the inner app component, I'm having a function called send data, which is not going to return anything. So send data as void. When I click the button, it's going to call this function. This function should trigger the event, triggering the custom event. So what's the custom event? Inner app event. So we can just trigger it. This dot inner app event dot, to trigger it, we have a function called emit. So when it is emitting, it's asking what data we can emit, because we clearly specify it's going to emit only string. So I can pass the data, this dot inner app component message. So when I click the button, it's going to trigger that event, and that event is occurred. When the event is occurred, whoever is subscribed, they can get it. So how can I use that means? Now I'm going back to my app.component.html. Here I'm just going to say whenever this event occurs, which event? Inner app event occurs, call the function named get the data. So I hope you all understood now. This get data is a function which needs to be created in the parent component, that is app component.ts. Here we got that data. So whenever I click the button, henceforth it's just going to call this function. But how we are going to get the data, whatever data we are emitting? For example, in the inner component.html, whenever I click this button, it's just going to call the send data, and the send data is emitting some string, right? I want to get that. So to get it, we are going to use a free variable here. There is a free variable called $event. So this $event is a free variable which is going to hold the data whatever we are emitting. What we are emitting? We are emitting a string. So in this get data, I can get it as a string. So something we are going to get, that's going to be of a string type because we are emitting a string. So once you have the string with you, then it's going to be very simple. We can say inner app component message holder. You just create one variable like that. In the parent, inner app component message holder, which is a string. By default, it doesn't have any value. So to do that, this dot inner app message holder equal to dot dot dot, doesn't have anything, but when the event occurred, it's just going to call it, right? So this dot inner message holder equal to the data. We have initialized it. Okay, but now this is just an event, right? We have created the event, but that event by default, it cannot pass the data to the parent. If I want to do it, it needs to be decorated with at output. So let me decorate this event with at output. So input is used to receive the data from the parent to the child via property. At output needs to be specified for the event so that whenever this event occurs, it passes the data from the child back to the parent. Okay, so let me just check whether this is working or not. So we received that, and okay, now we need to put it in the app component, right? So in the app component, there should be some message which is almost similar like this part, like message from child, inner app component message holder. So by default, it will be having one ellipse because nothing is there. We have passed from the data from the parent to the child. Now from the child, I want to send the data. So when I click this button, you can see that message from inner app, that is the child component, it is passing the details.